Hi, and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast, where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order and rank them from best to worst. My name's Sarah.
And I'm Ben.
What movie are we watching today, Ben?
Well, we have a special treat this week. We are watching Unheimliche Geschichten, a German horror anthology film from 1919. The title translates to Eerie Stories.
Awesome. I thought maybe it was about the Heimlich maneuver.
No, not quite. Not quite. So, this film came out in November of 1919. It's a German film directed by Richard Oswald and starring Anita Berber, Reinhold Schusel, and Conrad Veidt. And Germany was in a very interesting place in November of 1919.
It really was. So, I did a little bit of research about Germany. The amount of information that our school system goes into about post-war Germany is the Versailles Treaty, and that's really it. And then Hitler happened.
I feel like we're going to learn a lot about the difference between your social studies schooling in high school and mine. But what I can remember from high school is, they signed the Versailles Treaty, which was like extremely biased against them. Mm-hmm. They had to pay a ton of money out in war reparations to France, and they went from having a Kaiser and like having a monarchy to being like a democracy with like a constitutional republic, and having to pay all that money for war reparations in France and stuff like wrecked their economy and like sent their currency into like super inflation, so that like a loaf of bread was like 50 grand or whatever, and that everyone was poor and terrible. And then Hitler came and said it was all the Jews' fault.
So, what I've learned is that the day after World War I ended, Germany was already a very terrible place to be. I guess the Allies continued their naval blockade for Germany and blocked off all imports, meaning that even before the Versailles Treaty happened, there was disease and starvation just all over Germany. There's like an estimate of within the first few months or at least the first year, that 250,000 or more lost their lives due to starvation and disease because of the lack of importing that they could do for like food and everything. Then of course there's that Spanish influenza, which would not have helped anyone.
Right.
With 50 million people being killed worldwide, or dying worldwide. Yeah, and then of course like you mentioned having to pay back reparations, but that actually happened after the Republic was established. Mm. So in the midst of all of this death and disease, Germany had a revolution from November 1918 to August 1919.
Okay, so from right after when the war ended to, like, summer of the next year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think several months after this movie would have actually been released as well.
Yeah, this movie came out in November of 1919.
Okay, so the revolution ended 2 months before this movie came out.
Yeah.
So with this revolution, they replaced that imperial government with the Weimar Republic. Things weren't good under the Republic. I'll just put it like that. There was a lot to go through, and I was like, wow, this is really bad. Mm-hmm. But then in January 1919, the Social Democratic Party took power. In the Social Democratic Party taking power, they put in the Article 48, which allowed the leader of the government to rule against majority decisions, which ultimately is what gave Hitler power when he eventually came to power. So yeah, that's a whole lot of turmoil.
Yes.
In the midst of trying to make this movie.
Yeah.
And you had, like, people across Germany deciding that, no, this county is going to be its own republic, and lots of mini revolutions across these counties, and there was a lot of stuff going on. It was even in this early time that there was starting to be propaganda against the Versailles Treaty coming up, and propaganda for finding a scapegoat for all of this awfulness happening in the country.
Yeah, because I mean, you go from being like a big world power, you fight this devastating war that kills, a massive number of your, best and brightest. The aftermath of that war is that your entire government collapses, and there's a revolution, and a whole new government and a whole new system of governing comes in. Mm-hmm. And then, the economy collapses, you've got starvation and disease, you've got basically a perfect melting pot for people to just be angry and resentful about their lot in life. And yeah, if you can harness a scapegoat, you can do a lot.
Yeah, what was kind of interesting, and this might be a bit of a side note to talking about eerie stories, but the party that took power was the Social Democratic Party, but like the Communist Party was vying for power, and like you had all of these really very different parties coming from different ideologies. It was just really interesting to just like read up a little bit, not even get into like the nitty-gritty of this.
There's a very old and still pretty prominent film theory that the prevalence and popularity of horror cinema in 1920s Germany compared to, say, 1920s America has large part to do with the end of World War I and that period of turmoil and that period of, not knowing what was going to happen next, and this period of resentment and all this sort of stuff leading up into the rise of fascism in Germany.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, which won the war and wasn't super threatened or even involved or invested to a huge degree and had a big economic boom afterwards, the movies that you got in the 20s were, comedies and lighthearted and this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll see how much of that turmoil we see reflected in the film or whether it doesn't come across at all. I don't know. But definitely the people who made this film had lives that were certainly affected by the changing political turmoil in Germany at the time and later down the road.
Well, as soon as I read that there was just starvation and disease across the country, I was like, oh, horror movies seem... The idea of a horror movie with like grotesque imagery would tie in with that.
The director of Eerie Stories was Richard Oswald. He was Austrian and was a very prolific director in this period. He owned his own production company, and this was his 7th feature-length film. He had already done a horror movie 3 years earlier in 1916, Nächte des Grauens, which is the earliest known feature film to portray vampires. But unfortunately, we couldn't find a copy of that film for the podcast. It might be lost, or it might just never have received a home video release. Oswald's most notable film, Anders als die Andern, had come out earlier in 1919, earlier this same year. And that movie had been funded by the Institute for Sexual Science. It was the first film to portray homosexuals sympathetically, and it was intended as a protest film against the German laws of the time that criminalized homosexuality, which those laws were not repealed until 1994.
Wow.
The film was highly controversial, and within a year, it had been censored so that copies were only available to medical researchers and doctors and other academics for private screenings. Eventually, when the Nazis came to power, it was burned and destroyed as an example of the decadence of the Weimar Republic. And a copy was only recently rediscovered and screened last year. Now, that film starred Conrad Veidt, who is also in Eerie Stories. Mm-hmm. Veidt had been a soldier for the German army in World War I and contracted jaundice and pneumonia during the war. And while recovering, he had fallen in love with a young actress. The relationship didn't last, but when the war ended, Veidt was intrigued enough about the profession to decide to try his hand at it. Eerie Stories was his 8th film and his 4th working with Oswald. He had debuted on screen in the horror film Veidt in 1917, which we also did not cover on the list because although prints of it are known to exist, it has never been released on home video in any form. So we couldn't cover that film either. The other primary actors in Eerie Stories are also very well-known and popular individuals. Reinhold Schutzel was a huge star, very, very popular, to the degree that the Nazis granted him the title Honorary Aryan despite his Jewish heritage and allowed him to keep working during their regime. So that's how popular Reinhold was. And then the female lead in this film, Anita Berber, she was 20 years old when she appeared in this film and was already a famous nude dancer in cabarets. She'd been...
As you do.
Right. She'd been dancing since she was a teenager. Her androgynous appearance, nude performances, open bisexuality, and heavy addiction to cocaine, opium, morphine, chloroform, and ether made her a famous symbol of Berlin decadence at the time, and she was even immortalized in a 1925 painting by Otto Dix.
Wow. Did she do all of those drugs at the same time?
No, but she did do the chloroform and ether at the same time in a mixture in rosewater.
Yeesh.
Yeah, she died in 1928. Liver failure. Surrounded by morphine syringes.
Oh dear.
Meanwhile, while Reinhold Schutzel managed to get the honorary Aryan title, both Richard Oswald and Conrad Veidt ended up fleeing Germany in the early 30s for America due to their Jewish heritages. So the film is a horror anthology, meaning that it is made up of several short stories, which all have literary short story bases. Do we want to talk a little bit about those before we start the flick?
Yeah. So the short stories that are taken as inspiration for the stories in the anthology film is Anselm Hein's The Apparition, Robert Liebman's The Hand, Poe, of course, and his short story The Black Cat, which we haven't seen adapted so far, Robert Louis Stevenson, The Suicide Club, and Richard Oswald's The Haunting. Good luck if you want to look up what some of these short stories are about, because I could only find stuff on Poe and Stevenson. I could look up Robert Liebman. He's a German screenwriter, but I couldn't find anything about his short story The Hand. The Black Cat by Poe is about this man murdering his wife and then feeling guilt about it because their black cat won't go near him, and eventually the murder is found out because of the black cat.
Okay.
Stevenson's The Suicide Club is actually a collection of stories in itself.
Oh.
It's 3 stories, and it's kind of like a detective story, and by the end, those 3 cases come together.
So is it like Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, is the Suicide Club like a group that meets to talk about suicide stories?
No. It follows this detective as he solves these cases.
Okay.
And it's this detective and his friend. It seemed like a Sherlock Holmes kind of rip-off thing.
Okay.
And what I could find about it, just trying to summarize what it was all about, it wasn't quite clear what the Suicide Club was, besides a club of people who would want to kill themselves.
That's a short-lived club.
Exactly. So I don't understand why that would be a club.
Sure.
Or why that would be set up as a premise.
Mm-hmm.
I know how it's adapted into Eerie Stories is this detective comes across the Suicide Club. The club itself is organized around getting other people to commit suicide.
Okay.
So, late 1800s doxing groups, I guess.
Whoa. All right.
And because the detective comes across this club, he's chosen as their next victim.
I see.
And then the last short story, Richard Oswald's The Haunting, could not find any information about.
So that sounds like that's Richard Oswald, the director of the film.
Oh.
So it sounds like he just threw in his own story into the mix.
You know, sometimes you can't just have 4 stories, you need to have 5. It's a horror movie, you need to have an odd number.
Gotcha. odd numbers are unsettling.
Exactly. Yeah, so I have no idea what that will be. I assume a haunting?
Right.
That's all.
That's fair.
Yeah. For people who want to watch at home, Ben, where can people find this? Where are we watching it from?
Eerie Stories, unfortunately, has never seen a home video release in North America. There is a DVD release of it that is Region 2 and can play on region-free DVD players. And I think it even has English subtitles for the German intertitles, but it is a Region 2 DVD. So someone has uploaded it to YouTube because, as a film made before 1923, it is in the public domain. I don't really know what the quality is like of the YouTube upload. That's always a bit up in the air, but that's probably going to be the easiest place if you'd like to watch this film along with us.
Great. So you're going to hear a short musical interlude, and when we come back, we'll talk about the movie. We'll see you on the other side. So just a heads up, we're just going to include a trigger warning for domestic violence and some mild animal violence in the movie, but we look forward to you listening to the discussion afterwards.
Welcome back. We just finished watching Unheimliche Geschichten, and I would like to take this opportunity to say that before the break, we had been translating that title as Eerie Stories, but if you want to find the film on YouTube, you should be looking for Eerie Tales. Not really a big difference in meaning there, but certainly a big difference in search engines.
So what did you think of the film?
I thought it was pretty good. I think the main thing I noticed was, the last film we watched for the podcast was from 1914, and what a difference 5 years makes.
In terms of what?
In terms of cinematic techniques, filmmaking, sophistication. I mean, here we've got, shot variety. We've got close-ups. We've got a development of acting style. This is still a little bit over the top for maybe a modern audience's palate. But it's a lot closer to, what I would consider, the classic era of silent film. These guys seem to all know how to act and know what they're doing. And the main thing that's, the most important for horror films as a genre is this movie has lighting.
Yeah, it had some really interesting lighting techniques in there.
Yeah, you've got shadowed figures with edge lighting coming through windows. You've got the use of dark and shadow and playing with light and playing with darkness and all those things that are so essential to making the atmosphere of a film have that kind of scary, horrifying, terrifying vibe that we just didn't have in the previous films we've watched, which have all just basically been flat wash, 100% lit.
Mm-hmm. I actually really enjoyed this film. I'm not sure where it fits on the list, but we can talk about that later. But through these 5 different stories, 6 if you want to count the framing device as its own separate thing, it kind of set the mood in the beginning and really took us through, and then had this nice palate cleanser at the end.
Do you want to walk people through kind of the frame narrative in each of the 5 stories just in a basic sense as we kind of talk about everything?
Yeah, so to give folks an overview of what the film was like, it had this framing device of being set in this rare bookstore, and at night these 3 paintings of the devil, a prostitute, and death come alive, and they terrorize the shopkeeper a little bit, and then start reading some of the books and laugh at what's going on in these horror stories. It was really funny to see. Our 3 main actors, Anita Berber, Conrad Veidt, and Reinhold Schunzel, were playing the 3 portrait characters, and then we're playing the 3 main people in each of the short stories. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was sort of interesting because they use all 3 of these actors in every single one of the stories, and you've got Veidt and Schunzel and you've got Berber. It has the odd effect of turning almost all of the stories into love triangles. Mm-hmm. There's one that isn't, but all the rest of them are structured as love triangles. And Conrad Veidt gets to be the hero, quote unquote, in 3 out of 5, and then he's the villain in the other 2, but he's always opposing Reinhold Schunzel. And it's sort of interesting to see these three people go through these different iterations of being the three main characters in every single one of the shorts.
Yeah, it was neat to see their range of acting. Because I think there was a range there, even as much as it was overacting
For
to
sure.
the style.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the segments have at least one or two effectively scary moments. You know, some of the segments are definitely better than others, and it was sort of interesting to see the quality difference because they're all the same director. A lot of times when you get anthology films like this, you have different directors doing different little shorts and putting them together. This is all one crew, one director doing all the segments, but there was still this kind of unevenness.
Yeah. So the first one that we saw was The Apparition, which was very interesting. It was kind of structured like a mystery story, and it's based off that short story by Anselm Hines, also called The Apparition. So this follows Anita Berber. She's escaped from her husband, Reinhold, because he tried to kill her, and so they got a divorce. But he keeps following her everywhere, because that's not the creepiest thing.
And Reinhold plays this guy, like...
spot on creepy.
Crazy with a capital C. I mean, he's got this horrible greasy comb over and these wide eyes and just, like, going around like the creepiest...
It's like prototype Peter Lorre.
Yeah, a little bit. It's that sort of archetype. He's really unsettling. Yeah, and he's just following her everywhere. The story starts with her, like, accosting her in a park, and she just, like, at one point just punches him straight in the face. And then Conrad Veidt is this handsome young man who comes and kind of saves her and takes her away to this hotel where they're going to stay at for some romance.
At one point, like, she disappears overnight, and it's implied that, like, the film kind of structures it so you think that the husband did away with her and the hotel staff are trying to help cover it up, but in actuality she died from the plague overnight. The hotel is still trying to cover it up, and the husband had nothing to do with it. But I had a feeling it was like, so when we see the cause for their divorce, this is why I included that domestic violence trigger warning.
I mean, it pops up a few times in this movie.
But he puts a noose around her neck and tries to kill her. She gets out and is okay and escapes the marriage. But because she has the plague, and they say, like, we couldn't let her know and we couldn't tell anyone she had the plague, it felt like in his own weird mind for this character, he was trying to do like a mercy killing, maybe?
Oh, weird. I didn't really pick that up so much. I did think that the segment was effectively unsettling in the sense that the way that the story gets structured is he brings her to this hotel, and we see, after they arrive, we see the husband arrive at the hotel, creeping up after them. And then Conrad Veidt goes out for, like, I don't know, it's like drinks and cards or something with old friends. And then when he comes back to the hotel, he's like, oh, I'm going to visit my lady friend. And he goes to her room, and it's like...
trash.
Yeah, just like utterly trashed. And he's freaks out because he's like, the audience is meant to be thinking like, oh, the husband got there and killed her or something. And he freaks out, and he goes back to his room, and he kind of calms himself down by going like, oh, I must have had the wrong room.
Yeah.
So the next morning, he's like, hey, take me to that room. And he goes in, and there's no one there, and it looks fine. And he's like, hey, where's the lady who stays here? And the hotel staff are like, what lady?
You arrived here alone.
Right. And he's like, what? And, like, he thinks he's going crazy because they all deny her ever existing. He goes to the police station, and they're, like, ready for him, which is weird. I thought it was going to be like they were covering it up for the husband. You know, that the husband murdered her and then paid everyone off to, like, cover it up, because the police are like, yeah, you arrived there alone, nothing happened. But then the husband arrives at the police station and attacks Conrad Veidt, and then after Conrad Veidt gets away, the police are like, yeah, your wife never existed, to, like, the husband.
Yeah, it was very strange. I was also thinking, so before the break, I gave kind of an overview of what Germany was looking like with starvation and disease all across the land before this revolution. And they do specifically say plague in the movie, but between, like, starvation and disease, the Spanish influenza, it seemed like a very real possibility that this could happen to someone.
Right. I wasn't 100% sure, like, why. I guess they would cover it up because they don't want people to think the hotel is infected, like, they don't want to lose business. That's the thing. And then I was a little bit confused by the ending where Conrad Veidt learns the truth because, like, this rando guy just walks up to him on the street and is like, here's what happened. And then
he bribes that guy.
Who's that guy, though?
He was with a carriage. Like, maybe someone who works at the hotel, like a staff member or something. But he does pay him off to, like, get the information.
Okay, I was very confused because I didn't know who that character was supposed to be. So it just sort of felt like the movie ends with this character just coming up and being like, hey, here's what happened, and then explaining it, and then the end. That makes a little more sense. I was having a hard time piecing together the motivations and the sequence of events and stuff, but that makes more sense now.
And then with Conrad Veidt fainting at the end, he seems to, like, faint because he's like, what? Like, this is what happened? But he was getting pretty, like, up in a business, and so it seemed to imply that now he has the plague as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I didn't catch that either. That's a good point.
Yeah, and that's why it was, like, a very real possibility, very real problem that folks in Germany were probably facing, and that's why it would have been, like, besides the way that the lighting was done and the way that the implication for the husband was done and, like, the scariness through that, the scariness was also, now you're infected and you're going to die. Right.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it was the lighting that I noticed in this piece. And the probably the most, the standout segment is when he goes back to her place in the night and it's all wrecked and he starts freaking out. It's a great performance by Conrad Veidt. There's really good, really all three of the actors who are in every segment in this movie, all three of them are great. And they all do good work, although some shine more than others in certain segments. But Conrad Veidt is great in this first one. And so even as Anita Barber, she's not in a lot of it, but what she is in, she's very effective at playing the role that she's given.
Definitely. So the next one is The Hand, which I found very spooky and was really well done. So these two rivals in love.
These two jerks.
They want to marry Anita Barber and to decide who will get her, because she has to choose one of them.
Right.
Despite her being very friendly with every gentleman in the club. They roll some dice, and it's like, whoever gets the highest number out of these dice gets the girl. And it's a great little scene between our two heroes, or quote-unquote heroes.
Our two protagonists, let's say.
And Veidt wins, and as he's like, ha ha ha, I won, and pouring himself a drink, Reinhold chokes him out, and it's like...
It goes on forever.
I giggled through it, but it was really effective. It was really good.
Conrad Veidt gives an absurdly over-the-top death scene as he slowly dies, getting choked out by this guy, and he... The big deal is that his hands sort of contort into these rictus shapes that kind of freak out
the viewer.
Sure.
The dude.
Yeah, I was going to say freak out Reinhold because he kind of takes off all scared. And then we just kind of cut to like a few years later and he's
clearly left the girl alone because he just killed someone out of rage and like no haunting up until now, and then he meets the girl again, and they start dating.
She invites him to see her ballet performance.
Yes.
Which is a very weird ballet performance. It's kind of like ballet, but like, I think it was...
It's like contemporary dance, more like...
Yeah, it had a contemporary dance feel, totally. Like, it had a postmodernist, like, kind of, what am I expressing through the dance kind of thing. I guess it's there because Anita Barber was most famous as a cabaret dancer, so it makes sense that they give her
a dance scene.
Yeah.
But that's when Conrad Veidt starts to haunt him in like these really neat ways of like the hand coming out, and like it all the special effects are done with fade-ins and fade-outs.
The hand definitely has the most special effects of any of the segments, I would think.
Yeah. After the performance and the dude's thoroughly freaked out, she takes him back to her place with two other guys to have a seance, as you do.
Right.
I think it's because she's suspicious.
I think it's
come
just
across the body after.
I suppose. I also just get the impression from, like, various things I've read over the years that seances was just what people did in the turn of the century. Like, it was like, you know, instead of let's go back to my place and, like, watch some Seinfeld or whatever, like, people were like, let's go back to my place and have a seance. Like, it was just the activity that people did.
Seance and chill?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yes, that's exactly it. Yep.
Yeah, and then Conrad Veidt shows up as, like, this black silhouette in the back and just, like, chokes out Reinhold and just, kills him in revenge. But I thought it was really cool and really well done. And when Anita goes over to his dead body to see what's happened, he has, like, finger marks on his neck, which was a nice touch. So yeah, I found that one very spooky. I really enjoyed all of it, even the at times overacting.
Yeah, it really what helps the theatricality of the acting is that this segment, like the last, even maybe to a greater degree, is lit so dramatically. You know, just silhouettes and shadows and bright lights and shafts of light and things like that. And the theatricality of the lighting really allows for the more pronounced acting style. The thing that I kind of questioned about this segment is that it's called The Hand, because I feel like what's supposed to be happening is, you know, Reinhold sees Conrad's rigor mortis hand and it freaks him out. And then all the other times that Conrad kind of haunts him, it starts with the hand, like his hand, you know, opening a curtain, or they're doing the seance and everyone's got their hands on the table and there's an extra hand on the table and it's Conrad's, or whatever. But then it quickly becomes the hand as attached to the rest of Conrad, you know, and we see Conrad, and there's a bit where Reinhold goes to a window and Conrad's face is there in the window, super huge. And I feel like there maybe wasn't as much focus on the hand as the title kind of implies there will be. And I'm not sure if that's just because they were reluctant to lose Conrad Veidt's, like, screen presence and his face. Because he does have
quite the presence.
Yeah, he does have quite the face. He's, if you've never seen a Conrad Veidt movie, he's the Joker just in real life.
No kidding. How did we describe it earlier? Devilishly charming, but with extra emphasis on the devil?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, you're Conrad Veidt's the kind of guy where you are terrified of him despite your clear arousal.
So then the next one was The Black Cat. So this is the one that's adapted from Poe's short story, The Black Cat.
And it felt like they were trying to kind of give it a period, like, American setting, too. Like, the first two segments were just kind of, like, amorphously set in a general time. They could have been contemporary to Germany of the time. But, like, this one, everyone's dressed in, like, old-timey clothes, and, like, I just got a sense that they were trying to... It wasn't necessary to the story, but they were trying to set it whenever Poe wrote it.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. What's kind of neat about this story is it's one of Poe's short stories that is explicitly against alcoholism. Like,
sure.
Yeah.
I can see that, yeah.
And that they definitely included in this adaptation, but I don't see... There's no supernatural element to this.
Yeah, it's just kind of a straight story. There isn't even really, like, a mystery. It just kind of... We're just told a story. In Poe's version, was there Conrad Veidt's part? Like, this love triangle element?
I can't say for sure.
Okay. Because
what's supposed to be the whole thing with the Black Cat? So in the segment, the Black Cat reveals where the wife's body is hidden because the dudes plastered up a new wall and accidentally plastered up the cat in there too, and the cat breaks out just as people are searching the basement. In the short story, the cat actually leads them to the thing. The cat gets revenge against the husband for the wife, basically.
I wonder if they just couldn't train a cat well enough to do what they wanted it to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's also, again, Conrad Veidt's character basically had the role of the Black Cat.
Right.
Being like, hey, a murder happened here. Hey, let's go search this place. Hey, let's search the basement.
Yeah, like, that's the thing is, like, again, we have a segment called The Black Cat, and there's not enough Black Cat in it. I mean, this one... So, for anyone who, like, isn't familiar with Poe's story or the segment, essentially, Conrad Veidt is drinking at a bar, and some guys tell him that Reinhold Schunzel's wife is super hot. And Reinhold is just a ridiculous drunk. He goes home, Reinhold that is, and he has a wife, Anita Berber, and she has this black cat that she's always hanging out with. And the thing that did impress me here was Anita Berber's performance, because Reinhold plays his part, I don't want to say comedic, but very broadly in terms of just being like a super broad caricature of a drunk. But from Anita's performance, we can tell that he's abusive.
Yeah.
We don't really see a lot of it. Like, we don't...
We see it against the cat.
Right, but we don't, like, see any extended sequences of him, like, beating her up or whatever. But
even her death is off screen.
Exactly. But every time they're on screen together, she kind of shrinks from him when he is around her. She seems like she's terrified of him all the time. And that really sells the idea that, like, oh, there's clearly something, very wrong with this relationship. Mm-hmm. So then Conrad Veidt gets himself invited back to their place after, like, the bar closes. I think his plan is he's going to try and get Reinhold so drunk that he passes out so that he can just go and fuck his wife in his house. Which, like, that's a terrible plan, Conrad. So, of course, Reinhold wakes up and, like, there's nothing really very explicit because, like, you feel like if this movie was made today, like, he would have walked in on them, like, having sex. But here he just kind of, like, wakes up in time to see Conrad Veidt, like, kissing her on the cheek.
Yeah.
And that's enough for him to kick Conrad Veidt out of the house, take this cat out of his wife's arms, and he grabs it by, like, the scruff of the neck and kicks it off camera. And then he grabs Anita Berber and just tosses her off screen, and that's the end of her.
He throws beer mugs.
Right, yeah, she dies
like a
from...
chair maybe, or
she
something.
dies from having beer mugs thrown at her. Like, Anita Berber gets denied the opportunity to have an absurdly over-the-top death scene, like Conrad Veidt did.
Her acting as he's dragging her down the stairs, though, was really good. I would not be comfortable with someone who, maybe he's acting, but clearly looks like he's struggling to carry you downstairs.
Yeah, so he carries her down to the cellar, buries her, he amontollados her in the cellar, and we don't see it happen. This is the thing that bothered me about this.
Yeah, that's
like,
off screen, too.
We don't see him put her in the thing, we don't see what happens, and so we don't actually know that the cat is in there with her until the reveal.
He comments,
where's the
the cat?
Yeah. And then Conrad Veidt shows up with the police and is like, this guy killed his wife, let's search the place. And they search the basement and the cat pokes its head out of the badly put together wall. And they're like, oh, here's the wife. It just felt like a segment to me that had a lot of, like, lapses and could have been a lot better.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Like, the shots and the lighting even were more pedestrian in this one. Like, the scenes in Reinhold's apartment felt like The Honeymooners. Like, it was that kind of shot, where it was just this very standard kind of shooting style.
Yeah, it felt like a stage.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the Suicide Club? That was the next segment.
Oh, yeah. So Suicide Club...
We finally figured out what a Suicide Club is.
Right. The Suicide Club made no sense. It succeeded almost entirely on mood and atmosphere and cinematic technique. In terms of actual plot, it was nonsense. Like, I get what happened. It's not hard to understand, but, like, it doesn't make any sense.
I think because in order for an audience to understand what's going on, you need that twist at the end that he's the police commissioner. I think it would have helped, too, if we had seen what was on the piece of paper he found that led him to investigate the building.
Right, yeah.
I kept expecting, like, an intertitle showing us because there was so much attention to it.
This is the thing about... There were a lot of segments in this movie that I felt were missing intertitles. Because there was a lot of moments in all of the segments where I kind of felt like I was a little lost about what was supposed to be happening, and then I would kind of figure it out eventually just from context clues, but I feel like, we were missing a dialogue intertitle or something, just saying what's going on.
So the version we saw on YouTube, it did have some info at the beginning that some parts of the film were lost, so I wonder if that's part of it.
Perhaps.
So, for the listeners who are curious about what the heck we're talking about, the Suicide Club is the segment where Reinhold plays this detective that we don't know is a detective. He finds a piece of paper on the ground by this house that's supposed to be vacant, and he's suspicious. So he spies and sees people in the house. He goes in and finds out it's a suicide club. Basically, every night they meet, and if you pull a certain card out of the deck, you're getting killed that night. But it's kind of like a thrill seekers club.
Right, there's one dude at the table who's like, I've been here 2 years and I've never drawn the ace of spades.
Yeah.
This is the one where the roles get to reverse, because Reinhold's the hero and Conrad Veidt is the
leader of the club.
The leader of the club, and he's got his hair slicked back and white, and he's got his big black eyeshadow going on, and he's got a black ascot in his suit, and he's getting to be villainous.
Yeah, it was pretty great. And then Anita, unfortunately, is just the sister and is in 2 scenes.
Yeah, she's got a very minor role. I feel like she's only there so that she's there.
Yeah.
Because Reinhold gets into the club, and she just kind of shows up from nowhere and is like, this club is bad! And then Veidt has like a couple goons take her out of the room, and that's about it.
Yeah. It seemed like the way that it was a horror film was, I can't believe this is happening. Like, the absurdity of it all, almost.
It's nightmarish.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that made it work, was the most effective sequence in this one is Reinhold draws the ace of spades. And again, like, I feel like we were missing an insert saying that was the card, because he draws the card and he reacts, and you understand that it's the wrong card, but there's no, like, close-up. So it's a little confusing. But Veidt explains that at midnight, he's gonna die. And then he just leaves the room and leaves Reinhold alone in the room. And the rest of the segment is just Reinhold, like, freaking out, trying to figure out what he can do. And then finally the clock strikes 12 and he dies. And Conrad Veidt shows up again and is like, aha, his fear is what killed him. And it's like, oh, what an ironic twist ending. And then Reinhold gets up, is like, actually, I'm the police commissioner and you're all under arrest. And it's like, oh, what a more ironic twist ending. But it's, how does this club work? Why would you join this club? How does Conrad Veidt have buttons on his desk that, like, secure you to a chair and then just kill you? Like, oh, it just, if you were the police commissioner and you're here to, like, arrest the suicide club, like, you're not Sherlock Holmes, you're the police commissioner, like, get a bunch of police and raid the darn joint.
But he didn't know what was going on in there, right?
It
all happened within his first visit there.
I guess. It was effective, but it was a little bit like, what?
I don't know. I found it really fun. It had, like, the suspense, it had the thriller aspect, and the clock that was set in the back. Throughout the entire scene, as they're drawing cards, you could see the clock hands moving closer to 12. It started at 9, and then by the time that he drew the card, it was 10, and then they actually showed close-ups of the clock hands moving up to 12, and I don't know, I enjoyed it.
The clock imagery was definitely very effective, and I do agree that the suspense was well handled.
What about the last one? The title card said it was called The Spectre. We introduced it in the beginning of the episode as The Haunting. And this was written by the director.
Yes, this is the director's own entry. It's written in verse.
Yeah.
It's a poem, which immediately made me go like, oh, well, somebody thinks they're clever. It was the weakest entry in the movie. I was really disappointed by it. I did not enjoy it. I get what it was trying to do. It's not horror. It's a comedy. It's a funny... It's more like those Méliès shorts that we watched several episodes ago. It's trying to lighten up the proceedings after all the previous entries so that you walk out of the movie not disturbed. You walk out of the movie with, like, a smile on your face. But I think that's just a mistake.
Yeah?
I think, like, it's a shame that this movie goes out with a whimper instead of a bang. Like, I think, if you're doing an anthology, like, it's like, if you're a stand-up comedian, you put your funniest joke at the end. And if you're doing a horror anthology movie like this, you should put the scariest segment at the end. Your big finale. Instead, we get this thing that's very repetitive and obvious. even the bits where it's trying to be quote-unquote scary are just real cheap gags. I don't know, what did you think?
So, I felt like it was a palate cleanser, kind of like how you said. The setting reminded me of gothic horror stuff, because it's set in, like, this castle, this knight comes in, he's injured, but it wasn't... They were doing a comedy.
Yeah.
From the acting, from the fact that it was a poem. The French aristocratic setting was totally out of nowhere. It was a comedy.
That's the thing. It can't even be gothic horror because they set it in the era of powdered wigs and puffy shirts.
Yeah.
And you can never take anyone seriously with the powdered wigs and the puffy shirts. Nothing can ever be scary when the people reacting to it are dressed in that French aristocratic style with the fake beauty marks and everything. It just renders them inherently ridiculous.
Yeah, so I think they were going for a spoopy kind of feel, right? With the paintings are moving on their own, or there's people in big black cloaks that are clearly the servants.
The story is that Anita Berber, in this one, she's married to Conrad Veidt, finally. But he's neglectful. He's neglectful, yeah. So she's itching for some attention. And when this injured knight comes in, it's going to be her chance. And the injured knight's Reinhold. And they start flirting, and then spoopy stuff happens in the room with all, things moving on their own and whatnot. And Reinhold gets afraid and runs away. And then Conrad Veidt shows up and is like, I'm the best. And then they make out at the end.
Well, there is a scene where Conrad Veidt is like, hey, servants, while I'm gone on this fake emergency, scare them and show her what kind of guy this knight actually is. Mm-hmm. Because her whole thing is he's so courageous. And he's like, no, he's not. Look how scared he is. But I'm here, girl. Stick with your husband. He does
have a funny line about the guy being clearly brave because he's brave enough to flirt with his wife, which the husband never does.
Yeah.
Or whatever. That was funny. But, I feel like this segment would have been more effective if they'd Scooby-Doo'd it, where if it had been legitimately scary, we think there really is a ghost or whatever, until the ending when, the husband pops out and is like, haha, it was all a trick. And then, the ending could be a funny little palate cleanser, oh, nothing was actually wrong moment. But the fact that it's kind of ridiculous all the way through and it's a full-length segment like the others just made it really tiresome for me.
Yeah, I think you're right that it could have been more effective as a Scooby-Doo thing. I started to question why this was in the movie. Because all throughout, everything's been pretty, in varying degrees, a horror movie. Mm-hmm. And then we have this comedy at the end. And I started thinking back to Germany in 1918, 1919, with the revolution ending 2 months prior to this movie's release, with death and disease everywhere, with an uncertain future, ending on a comedy after scaring the bejesus out of people. Maybe they wanted to have some entertainment to make them forget about what's outside of the theater.
I guess. I think it's tough because it's the last segment. The last segment's what you think about as you walk away from a movie, right? And I definitely agree that was their intent. That their intent was to give you this respite as the last thing. The problem is that it sucks. That it's not a good segment, right? It doesn't measure up to the other segments in quality.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's the director's own segment.
You look at things as bookends, right? We have the very first one, the apparition, being a tale about this woman having the plague and now you're infected, and that being a very real problem. And then ending with this very fantastical segment.
Right. That we've ended the story with just something that's so far removed from anything that anyone could care about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm just thinking, because the audience is in on the joke that the things that are happening on screen aren't scary. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's as if we're supposed to be laughing at the people who are scared.
Right.
So I wonder if he's saying something about horror films in general, or about, being afraid.
I don't know. I think that, if that's the case, then he's ended his movie with a segment that invalidates the entire rest of the movie up to that point. Which to me, like, kind of isn't a good decision.
I think you would have still gotten that effect of, like, a palate cleanser without invalidating things if it had been, like you said, a Scooby-Doo ending.
Yeah, and I think that would have been a lot easier to take at the end of this film. Otherwise, this last segment is just kind of hard to sit through.
I mean, Conrad Veidt doesn't even look attractive in that wig.
Do we want to rank this movie?
Sure.
Did you have any other thoughts on it?
Well, I was curious which of the 5 stories you found the most scary.
Ooh, probably a toss-up for me between The Apparition and The Hand. Those are, the movie starts real strong, in my opinion, with those. The Apparition I really like because it manipulates information. One of the things that I always find scary is not knowing what's going on, not knowing why stuff is happening. That nightmare feeling where you walk through a door and the room that you're in now is not the room you expected to be in, and everybody seems to be acting like nothing's wrong, even though you know something is. That to me is a really terrifying feeling. The Hand's super scary too, does a good job, but in The Hand we know what's frightening. You killed a dude and his ghost is haunting you, right? The Apparition plays with not knowing really what's going on, and Conrad Veidt isn't sure if he's going mad or not, and it's just, in those scenes where we don't have the answer yet, it's so effective. So I think I'd give it to The Apparition, actually.
I would agree.
So it was all downhill from there.
Downhill's the wrong term. Cool. Yeah, let's rank this.
It's going to be a little bit hard to rank this film because it's an anthology. But it is a single piece. And we should rank it, as a single piece.
Definitely.
Mostly because there's so many anthology films, horror anthology films, that if we rank these as separate things, we're going to have to do that for all of them, and it's just going to get ridiculous.
Yeah.
So right now, we have The Student of Prague as our number 1 film, and last week's movie, The Avenging Conscience, sits at number 5.
Okay.
Was this better than The Avenging Conscience?
I was trying to think about which one was more effective, which one was tighter in how it was trying to tell its story, and I had a real hard time with it. But I do think it's better than The Avenging Conscience.
I think that Eerie Tales has the advantage that, because its segments are short stories, it doesn't mess around as much as Avenging Conscience does, which had a tendency to go off on tangents and waste your time with subplots and characters that were completely unnecessary. Both movies kind of end with bizarre detours into comedy, but at least Eerie Tales had a rationale and a structure in place to allow that, whereas Avenging Conscience just goes off into Panland for no reason for 10 minutes at the end.
Yeah.
So I do think that Eerie Tales is better. The question is how much better. Above Avenging Conscience we have the 1912 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and above that we have Frankenstein.
I believe the reason Frankenstein is up that far is because of how effective it was, but also because of its special effects, which I think are better than the special effects in Eerie Tales.
But Eerie Tales' special effects aren't trying to do as much. Frankenstein was trying to build a man from nothing. Eerie Tales doesn't use a lot of special effects. It really just has them in the hand for some ghost stuff. Everything else is assembled out of, the way the film is edited, the way the film is shot, the way the film is lit. It's eerie.
Maybe that's why that it's called Eerie Tales.
Sure. But, it's not as effects heavy. Above Frankenstein is The Sealed Room, and above The Sealed Room is Student of Prague.
It should not be anywhere near Student of Prague, in my opinion.
Okay. But is it better than The Sealed Room, then? And this is the thing is, again, the problem becomes that Eerie Tales is an anthology. Would I rank The Apparition above The Sealed Room? Yes. Would I rank The Spectre above The Sealed Room? No. But if I'm taking them all together, where do I put them? I think the advantage that Eerie Tales has above almost everything we've watched so far is the acting. Conrad Veidt is great.
The acting in The Student of Prague is also very good.
That's true. I mean, Scapinelli was fantastic.
Yeah, like everyone in that movie was fantastic.
Okay. So what are you thinking? I'm thinking it could go as high as number 2 on the list and as low as number 4 on the list.
I am thinking it's better than The Sealed Room because of its usage of lighting and the fact that it had over-the-top acting, but it actually did it well because of the way that the lighting and the movie itself was structured, rather than The Sealed Room, which was, I mean, D.W. Griffith just does this, like, overacting as his own style.
Yeah, I mean, The Sealed Room really is a stage play. I mean, it cuts between these two locations, but only because he can't film both at the same time. You know, if you could really picture The Sealed Room as being totally done on a stage with just a wall in the middle of the stage that these people get sealed up in, and these two rooms on either side. Whereas Eerie Tales is a movie, and, you know, it uses cinematic techniques to create mood and atmosphere and feeling and terror very effectively in a lot of different places.
Yeah.
Alright, well then I think entering the list at number 2 is Unheimliche Geschichten from 1919.
Great. Well, if you enjoyed listening to this episode of Scream Scene, you can follow us on Twitter at _Scream Scene. You can find us on Tumblr at screamscenepodcast.tumblr.com. You can find the list of the movies we have ranked so far on Tumblr as well. And feel free to submit an ask to suggest a movie for us to watch or to appeal.
Our next episode, we will be watching probably the first movie on this list that I legitimately expect other people to have seen, which is Das Kabinett des Dr. Caligari by Robert Wiener.
Yeah, Conrad Veidt.
Yes. Another Conrad Veidt and a major horror classic.
Yes. I mean, as long as there's more Conrad Veidt in my life, I'm okay.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.